All right. Welcome to the Humble Philosopher. Today I'm going to be critiquing Donald Hoffman, and I'd like to show that there's a presupposition that he's making that when you understand that that presupposition is false, the entire theory falls apart. So if that interests you, if you would like to hear somebody make a real critique against Donald Hoffman, please stick with it because it's going to be a little rambling, but I'm going to get to a real nugget that shows why Donald Hoffman's theory doesn't work. I call this the humble philosopher because, I have a side of me that can penetrate into these issues and into these ideas and bring about insight, or at least I think so. But I don't have that mathematical side. And so here I am, I'm going up against somebody who's got their PhD from MIT. All right, what are the chances that I'll win? But there's a foundational assumption that Hoffman's making about conscious entities that isn't true. And when you understand what that assumption is, then his entire theory falls apart. So maybe that's of interest to you. Some lay philosopher is going to take down Donald Hoffman. But to get there, it's going to be a little circuitous. All right. So first thing I'm going to do, share my screen. And I just want to read an abstract of Hoffman's own paper. A theory of consciousness, whatever else it may do, must address the structure of experience. Our perceptual experiences are richly structured. Simply seeing a red apple swaying between green leaves on a stout tree involves symmetries, geometries, orders, topologies, and algebras of events. Are these structures also present in the world, fully independent of their observation? Perceptual theorists of many persuasions, from computational to radical embodied, say yes. Perception veridically presents to observers structures that exist in an observer-independent world, and it does so because natural selection shapes perceptual systems to be increasingly veridical. Okay, and there I need to stop just for a second because that was my first video on Donald Hoffman. Basically, he's got this idea that evolution has created this headset, and that's all we're seeing of reality is this evolutionarily created headset. And it does so because natural selection shapes perceptual systems to be increasingly veridical. The problem here is that the engineering capability of evolution has always been assumed and has never been established. If you're interested in a mathematical treatment of that, check out some of my videos on Dennett's demon, and you'll see that nobody's done the math to show that that's possible. And there's a next step that I take. I call it Dawkins' homework. This is Richard Dawkins, who is, the foremost proponent of strict evolution. And what I mean by Dawkins' homework is nobody's ever taken a structure like the eye and deconstructed it backwards in time and showing that it could have come into being step by step. They'll always pull a fast one, a dodge, a bait and switch. And instead of talking about how the eye as a structure could come into being step by step, they simply talk about the selection value of vision. The problem there being that any degree of vision takes an entire eye of some form to offer you that selectable value of vision. And so there's this whole engineering problem that's just being skipped over. And so for me, Hoffman's theory falls apart just on the basis that it requires a headset of some sort in some reality, which would be composed of a collection of irreducible complexities, structures that have no selective value of their own, that would have to have come together just in that right way to make that headset. And so it fails based on that. But when you get into that discussion, it becomes religious for folks, and it becomes religious for the people who think that they aren't religious, which is the crazy part. This creative power of evolution is in and of itself a religious belief that is completely unproven. It's just unfortunate that people turn their brains off when it comes to that. I'm trying to focus people on that with Dennett's Demon. If you go and look at Dennett's Demon, try to beat it. I doubt you can. All right. So I told you it was going to be circuitous, but I'm going to get to another, bankable falsehood in Hoffman's thesis. And so then we can just quit with this nonsense of scaring people to think that they're stuck in some headset, Anyway, and it does so because natural selection shapes perceptual systems to be increasingly veridical. Okay, somebody show me that step by step. Here we study 4 structures: total orders, permutation groups, cyclic groups, and measurable spaces. We ask whether the payoff functions that drive evolution by natural selection are homomorphisms of these structures. All right. So a homomorphism is just if you have a set that has relations within it and you translate that to another set, do those relations follow? All right. You're looking at me through homomorphism right now, right? I am just a matrix of pixels and that you're looking at. But there's a homomorphism to the reality of me here in my room making this video, right? So that's basically what a homomorphism is. But it's important for his theory because this is really where it goes off the deep end. We ask whether the payoff functions that drive evolution by natural selection are homomorphisms of these structures. So many assumptions in that. We prove in each case that generically the answer is no, as the number of world states and payoff values go to infinity. The probability that a payoff function is a homomorphism goes to 0. We prove in each case that generically the answer is no, as the number of world states and payoff values goes to infinity. The probability that a payoff function is a homomorphism goes to 0. All right. That's where his theory gets hardcore. That's where it goes off the deep end, and that's where he starts, decides to go out and scare people and then tell you that you're playing Grand Theft Auto. And anyway, what does that mean and why is it wrong? What is the presupposition of that is incorrect? He's in his conversation with Jordan Peterson. He starts the conversation off like that. I mean, he's got an elevator pitch for this at this point. He just goes around from podcast to podcast with this elevator pitch. I'm going to go back to that because I'm going to just need to read that over and over again. We prove in each case that generically the answer is no. As the number of world states and payoff values go to infinity, the probability that a payoff function is a homomorphism goes to 0. So you have to understand that when you're a materialist, a reductionist, a computationalist, an evolutionist, that your a priori assumption, your the idea is that the conscious agent that you're trying to explain, which is what he's trying to explain, he's trying to explain you. He's assuming that you're a finite being. You're a finite being that's capable of a finite number of calculations, computations, and that those computations are representing reality to you in a closed system that is you. What he's saying is that the number of world states and the number of payoff values, and you can really just drop payoff values. Payoff values would be just the number of ways that you could get something from the environment that would help you survive and reproduce. It's way overly simplified, mathematical superstition. It's bullshit. It's the world states. So there's a problem in consciousness, the philosophy of consciousness, which is combinatorial explosion. So, I got one of the newer iPhones now, and it doesn't even have the fingerprint thing. It just has, the face recognition. And the face recognition is pretty good, and it can, if I'm wearing a mask or have my sunglasses on or my hat down low, it usually gets me. But often it doesn't. That's because my face has an infinity of ways that it can be viewed. This is combinatorial explosion. And what Apple can do, what the iPhone can do, is it can see certain mathematical relationships, the width of my eyes, the topology of my nose, et cetera, et cetera. But the number of states that it can self-represent are always some finite value. And so there are always ways that I can hold that phone that it won't be able to compute something that matches its own internal states. And so then I'll have to use my passcode. The outside world is always fresh. It's always, whatever you lay your eyes on has never existed before and will never exist again. There's the novelty of the moment. And so these are the world states that he's talking about. I just went on a hike, and there was just a really nice stand of trees at this one spot on the trail. And I just stood there and just, took in this stand of trees. What we don't realize in that moment, or what we often don't realize in that moment, is the infinity that we're looking at. We know what trees are, right? We know what a forest is, that saying, you can't see the forest for the trees. We have some internal representation of what that is. But we don't have, I'm going to read something. Right? I know nobody's going to read this far down, watch this far down in this video. These are extraordinary complex things, but when you get to sort of root causes on them, then things come into focus. The problem is the people that have the intelligence to do this are typically the ones that are really, really good at math. And so they're the ones that are then loath to admit that math is a second order phenomenon. Math, numbers can never handle consciousness, and it can never handle truth, and can never handle meaning. They can only be instruments to handle that meaning. And so the reason that somebody like Donald Hoffman's theory is doomed from the start is because he has essentially superstitious notions of what math can and cannot do. And the only ones that would really understand that, in a really rigorous sense, are mathematicians themselves. And they have this conflict of interest where they want numbers to be the truth because, that would put them at the top because they are the best at manipulating those numbers. Therefore, they would have the authority and they would have the power. But because of Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which shows that you can't go into mathematics and find truth, you have to bring truth to mathematics. Math then can't do all these things that they're claiming it can do. There is no creative power in math that could create a headset, and that includes just the basic statistical argument that is Darwinism, just the algorithm of natural selection acting on random mutation could not bring about irreducible complexity. It has never been shown. It will never be shown because it's simply impossible. The other thing is that consciousness is always infinite, even if it's constrained to our body and to our lives. So I know I've lost everybody now and nobody's watching this far, but if you are, there's a thought for you here. And there's a reason why Hoffman's whole program is a non-starter from the beginning. But I'm going to read you a quote here from Descartes that is in a book that I've been using here recently, Darwin's Dangerous Idea. So this is Daniel C. Dennett, his own work. He's a philosopher, a Darwinian philosopher at that. And in this book, he laid out every reason why he is wrong, and I just love him for that. All right, so I'm going to read this quote, and then it's going to get at the reason why nothing that is conscious can ultimately be computable, because computation will always be finite. And it will get into this reason why Donald Hoffman has made this absurd claim that you and I can't ever actually access reality. And when you see how wrong he is, if you could then understand what that means about you and I, it would be worth all this rambling. Okay, so this is Descartes. And he's talking about his reasons for why machines couldn't end up doing what human beings do. And I agree with him, though, people who are being disingenuous can find, arguments that try to protect them from the truth, which is that numbers aren't what, 99% of mathematicians want them to be. You are not a number. ChatGPT will never be conscious. The first is that the machines, could never use words or put together other signs as we do in order to declare our thoughts to others. I know you're already saying, but hold on. For we can certainly conceive of a machine so constructed that it utters words, and even utters words which correspond to bodily actions, causing a change in its organs. If you touch it in one spot, it asks what you want of it. If you touch it in another, it cries out that you are hurting it, and so on. But it is not conceivable that such a machine should produce different arrangements of words so as to give an appropriately meaningful answer to whatever is said in its presence, as the dullest of men can do. I know you're saying, ChatGPT. Secondly, even though such machines might do some things as well as we do them, or perhaps even better, they would inevitably fail in others, which would reveal that they were acting not through understanding, but only from the disposition of their organs. All right, disposition of their organs means disposition of their internal states. Dispositions of whatever their present state is in ones and zeros. I mean, I'm extrapolating now to um, computers, but you have to understand that what he means by organs is just by its own machinery on the inside. And that's what we're talking about here with numbers. Anything that's finite, would have to fall back on a predetermined menu, a predetermined menu, options. It would have to flip through which one of my predetermined states can meet this absolute novelty of the moment, right? And that's what I'm getting at here with Hoffman's, superstition. We prove in each case that generically the answer is no. As the number of world states and payoff values goes to infinity, the probability that a payoff function is a homomorphism goes to zero. What he's saying is that the possibilities outside the system are infinite, and the possibilities inside the system are finite. And no matter how many possibilities are inside the finite system, in relation to that infinity, the difference itself is always infinity. And so that's why the homomorphism goes to zero. And if that's what we were, and if that's what this is, that would be true, but that's not what this is. That's the whole point. For whereas reason is a universal instrument which can be used in all kinds of situations, these organs need some particular disposition for each particular action. Hence, it is for all practical purposes impossible for a machine to have enough different organs to make it act in all the contingencies of life in the way in which our reason makes us act. Hence, it is for all practical purposes impossible for a machine to have enough different organs to make it act in all the contingencies of life in the way in which our reason makes us act. It's impossible for a finite being instantiated in material to have enough internal states to match the infinity of states on the outside. All right. That then gets into the deeper questions of Gödel's incompleteness theorem and his proof that there is no meaning in language. And I'm sorry, that there's no meaning in mathematics. There is no meaning in mathematics that the mathematician does not bring to the numbers. And so when Donald Hoffman is saying we prove in each case that generically the answer is no, as the number of world states and payoff values go to infinity, the probability that a payoff function is a homomorphism goes to zero. Descartes was saying the exact same thing in the 17th century. I mean, when I read that quote, I was like, wow, that's really prescient, because that still holds for our conversations now with all our computers. Donald Hoffman is assuming that the agents that he's trying to model in math are finite. If the agents that he's trying to model are finite, if they were, and he's trying to model you and I would never be able to feel pain. We'd never be able to feel joy. We'd never be able to have a meaningful state, because finite states can never represent those meaningful states. So when he's making this bold claim, We prove in each case that generically the answer is no. As the number of world states and payoff values go to infinity, the probability that a payoff function is a homomorphism goes to zero. What he's saying is that the moment is always infinite and therefore could never be reflected by any of the finite possibility of states. The infinite moment is impressing upon the finite machine. The finite machine can only go back and choose from one of a limited number of states, even if those limited number of states are, a quadrillion, or, a quadrillion times a quadrillion. See, this is the whole limitation of all computers, and this is where the whole superstition stems from. And this is the complete lack of appreciation for what consciousness actually is. Consciousness is infinite. You are infinite, but you're a constrained infinity. You're an infinity that is constrained to your body and your experience in this lifetime. And I know that that's a paradox, but you can begin to find that as true in your own experience. I don't know, maybe somebody will find entertainment value in somebody trying to work through these things. Hoffman's theory fails because he's assuming the engineering power of evolution, and none has been established. Hoffman's theory fails because he assumes that the things that he is modeling are finite, trying to represent an infinity. And the gap between finite and infinity is always infinity. Therefore, the internal representations of the finite can never have anything to do with the actuality outside of that, if the thing that we are studying is finite. But it's not. The thing we are studying is infinite. It's a constrained infinity, but it's infinite. It's a constrained eternal, but it's eternal. And so now I'm going to launch off into something else, but it will show you that you're eternal. So you have to understand the implications of Gödel's incompleteness theorem. And to understand Gödel's incompleteness theorem, maybe this analogy is helpful. Imagine that you do math by hand for something. You're shopkeeper, old school shopkeeper. This is the 17th century. This is contemporaneous with Descartes. And so you got this hand ledger that each day you're keeping your books by hand. One day you say, you know what, I don't trust myself. I don't trust human beings. I don't trust, why do I know that these numbers are real? They mean what they mean. My math is correct. And so you build a machine. And the machine verifies whether the math you've been doing by hand is true. And good news, the machine you've built says that the math you've been doing is true. The next question is, how do I know I can trust that machine? How do I know I can trust that machine? I say the machine is correct, but I don't trust me. It's why I built the machine in the first place. So what do? You build a second machine that proves the first machine is correct, that proves that your longhand mathematics is correct. And you look at that second machine and it says, the first machine is correct. But what's your problem? Your problem is, how do you know that that second machine is correct? The correctness of that second machine is just coming from you. Uh-oh. So now I got to build a third machine to prove the second machine that proves the first machine that proves my longhand math is correct. And so you see the problem. It becomes an infinite regress. Infinite regress. At some point, I'm just going to have to assume that my machines are correct. And as long as I continue to do math and I don't go broke, but that's always coming from me. The halting problem, where that stops, who says yes, who says no, that comes from the inside. The authority is still always me. It's never in the machine. Because in order for the machine to have the authority, it would have to be infinite. All right, that is Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Gödel proved that there's always something, some axiom about math that must be true for the math to be true that the math itself can't represent. And so without getting into it, and I've tried, and it's really fucking hard. But what I'm saying about Gödel's incompleteness theorems is conceptually correct. What I'm saying is that to do the actual math, you'd need a PhD. And even PhDs have a hard time with it, but it's been rigorously established as fact. So Gödel created a mathematical system, a mathematical formulation, a mathematical formalization that allows math to prove that math is correct, with a caveat. So basically, let's say you have 2 + 2 = 4. You have the same problem that you had as the shopkeeper. 2 + 2 = 4. Okay, I know that's true, but I don't trust me. I don't trust human beings, right? I trust machines. I trust math. So what Gödel came up with is a way to write a Gödel sentence that proves that 2 + 2 = 4 mathematically. And so you can draw a circle around 2 + 2 = 4, and you can formalize that with a Gödel sentence to prove that 2 + 2 = 4. The problem is now you have a new mathematical structure that either you self-verify as true, or you say, I don't trust human beings, I don't trust myself, I need math to tell me that that Gödel sentence is correct. And so you draw a circle around that Gödel sentence, and you can you can formalize a new Gödel sentence that proves the first one, but this new Gödel sentence then has a problem, which is either you self-verify that it's true, or you write another Gödel sentence and another one and another one and another one. So it's an infinite regress. But even that seems too abstract. Who cares? Okay, I just at some point get tired of drawing Gödel sentences. I get tired of building machines to prove my machines, and I just go with it. But this is the eternity problem. This is what Donald Hoffman and all these guys can't do with their math, which is to formalize authority. So now, imagine that you and a friend are having an absurd conversation. And the absurd conversation is that you're arguing that each of you is the only person who feels pain, because every time you felt pain, it's only been your pain that you felt. And your friend says, bullshit, I've only ever felt my pain. And you guys get in an argument, and your friend goes, I'm going to show you. Bam, and he punches you in the nose and goes, see, I don't feel any pain. Your pain isn't real. And you're like, oh my God, that hurt so bad. And so you punch your friend in the nose. Pow. And your friend goes, holy shit, now I feel pain. So, right, at a certain point, you're going to stop that game, probably after one punch apiece. And you're just going to say, okay, I feel pain. I feel it. That's my authority. I feel pain. I'm going to trust that you feel pain, and we're going to stop this. But let's say you had an Android, and this is Chat GPT 1 million. And this Android says, I feel pain too. And you go to the Android, no, you don't. Android does, yeah, no, I feel pain. Go ahead and punch me in the nose. So you punch the Android in the nose, and the Android goes, holy shit. Oh my God, I feel pain. Now, there's something that you can do with the Android that you can't do with you and your friend, which is that you can demand of the Android the mathematical formulation, the code, the ones and zeros that represent his pain. And so he's got to take off his skull cap, and he's got to show you, here it is. Here are these ones and zeros that are the authority of my pain. But what can you do then? Either you have to self-verify that android's pain, at which point you are the authority of his pain. He is not the authority of his pain. Or staying with his world, which is ones and zeros, which is a finite set of states, no matter how large, you have to create a Gödel sentence staying in his realm of math that proves that those ones and zeros are authentic, that they add up. You have to create a Gödel sentence for that, right? If those ones and zeros don't add up, there is no pain. And so you've taken the authority out of those ones and zeros, and you've put them in a new set of ones and zeros. But you still have the problem that you need another set of ones and zeros, and so it becomes infinite. And so can you see how you could never feel pain if you yourself didn't at least have access to infinity? All right. So that's the problem with Donald Hoffman's whole theory, is that it assumes that conscious agents have a finite number of internal states that they can generate. And since reality itself is infinite, the gap between those two is always infinite. Therefore, the inner states of the finite agent can't ever have anything to do with the outer states as they are, except that that's a flawed premise. We are not studying laptop computers in three-dimensional space. We are studying conscious agents that have meaningful experience in three-dimensional space. And consciousness is in of itself infinite, and therefore can always represent the infinity that's outside of it. That's the self. That's the self that goes all the way back 5,000 years in the Upanishads. That's the whole purpose of slowing one's thoughts, going into trance and focusing on the self, because that's how powerful your consciousness is in its original state. You're like, when I was a kid, I went to a summer camp. It was up in the way up in Wisconsin, land of 10,000 lakes, and we went out in our canoes on an overnight camping trip, and they took us to this island, and the island had in it a spring-fed lake. Anyways, there was a bog, and we ran out on it and jumped in and swam around. But there was a lake there, but the lake wasn't in and of itself. It was fed, right? And so that's the idea, is in Buddhism, in Vedanta, is to trace that sense of I all the way to its source. And if you do that, that's nirvana. That's what you're plugged into. You're plugged into infinity. You're plugged into eternity. It's why you can experience pain. It's why you can experience joy. It's why you can reason. It's why you have access to the Platonic realm of forms, which gives any meaning to what you're seeing anyways. The number one, have you ever seen the number one? I mean, I don't want to go down too many rabbit holes on that. I'm just saying, right? You have one finger, you have 5 fingers, do you? I mean, you don't know where your finger begins and ends, right? You impose that because you have this access to. And so Hoffman's whole theory fails because he's trying to model the evolution of laptop computers in 3-dimensional space. It's a completely different ballgame. You are not a closed off finite system. You are a constrained infinity having an experience on planet Earth. So I know that's an inelegant explanation, but maybe this came on while somebody was driving and they couldn't get to it, and by the time they got to the end of it, they were like, damn, okay, I kind of get what he's talking about. Or maybe somebody has the formalization powers to see what I'm talking about here. The problem is the vast majority of mathematicians are loath to demote math to a second order phenomenon. They want it to be truth, and it's not. It's just a tool that we use very effectively to help us interface with truth, but it is not in and of itself truth. All right, that's it. Thanks.